Hi, I'm Sharon Pratt, host of IPPH on Air. IPPH, the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History, housed on the campus of the University of the District of Columbia, with the mission of rediscovering the history of Washington, D.C., while drilling down on touchstone issues of the day. And so today, what we look at is how do we reframe the narrative around Washington, D.C.? How do we rebut maybe baked-in notions of who's competent and who's worthy, particularly when coming to enjoy full political enfranchisement in the political structure of the United States of America? We have two perfect guests, both of whom are out-of-the-box thinkers, agents of change, particularly in the world of performing arts and popular culture. We have Nikki Giovanni, almost could stop there, right? She's a teacher, she's an activist, and she's a poet par excellence. We also have Manuela Goyanes, who is the artistic director as of 2018 with the very avant-garde Woolly Mammoth Theater. We were lucky to recruit her from New York City, where she played a major role with the Public Theater of NYC. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. This is Nikki.
I am so glad to be here. This is Maria. And just to say, Nikki, I think your poetry is amazing. You're on my bedside table. Actually, A Good Cry is just sitting right there with me throughout this whole pandemic time. So I'm just really honored to be here. And thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. I want to, Sharon, just take a moment to congratulate the Smithsonian, if I may, on having the sense to hire Kevin Young to now be the head of the African American Museum. I think that is
Amen.
I think that's so wonderful, and I'm so glad for the African American Museum, because we normally say, "Oh, isn't that lucky for Kevin?" Kevin is a wonderful man, so no, it's not lucky for Kevin. It's lucky for you.
Well, good. I'm glad you did that shout out. That's great. Thank you, Nikki. And we're going to be Nikki, Maria, and Sharon. And so today what we do want to, as I said, talk about, how there are baked in notions of who's competent, who's worthy, how popular culture, performing arts often establish these notions and perpetuate these notions. But before we get into the heart of that, I think it's important to understand, and for our listening audience to better appreciate how you became who you are. So, Nikki,
Okay.
You are a poet. How did you realize you were going to pursue poetry at a very young age?
I'm really a daydreamer. And in all fairness, to every daydreamer out there, the art of poetry is loneliness. So I used to lie in my bed at night. I shared a bedroom with my sister, and my sister wanted the bedroom. She wanted the bed next to the wall. I don't know, to hear what's going on with the adults, I guess. But I was very lucky that I had the bed next to the window, and I could look out at the stars, and I could daydream. I don't think it was now that I'm 77 years old, I realized that a great part of my young life was unhappy because my parents had an unhappy marriage. But I knew that I could not allow their marriage to make me something I didn't want to be. And what I wanted to be was loved and happy. And I was very fortunate to have a grandmother. And I went to visit my grandmother and finally asked her, could I live with her? And grandmothers always say yes. And she said yes. She said, well, what she said was, I'll have to ask John Brown. But that's her husband. I lived long enough to know that John Brown had nothing to say about what happened in that house. She's the one who made up the decision. And I think I was very lucky because, again, I could take the phone, the radio at night and turn on WGN, which nobody knows except people in Knoxville. And I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I could listen all night to jazz. And it's so wonderful. And so you say, how did I become whatever it is that I am? I am because of the love of my grandparents. And watching them showed me what love could be. Because if I had only watched my parents, I would have thought love was crazy.
Right. Well, that's a blessing. And it was your grandmother, I thought I read also your grandmother was also the one who sort of nurtured your activism?
Oh, my grandmother was very much grandmother, and actually Rosa Parks were both at Heinemann Settlement School. But grandmother was very. She was just. You have to get things done, and she was a big believer in doing that. And all I wanted to do was whatever would please her. So when they first had the first march, or it wasn't the first march, I'm sure, but the march in Knoxville, Tennessee, in support of Montgomery. Grandmother stood up, I'll never forget that. Grandmother stood up at Mount Zion Baptist Church and said, John Brown and I are too old to march, but my granddaughter Nikki is here. She'll be here first thing in the morning.
That is great. Boy, no, without a doubt, she was the inspiration.
Oh, my. I had to laugh, and I said, Grandma's going to get me killed. But the question was, who would I rather die? Would I rather die because of some crazy white person, or would I rather die because I broke grandmother's heart? So I was up the next morning. I had my grits, as we had grits every morning, and I was there to march because that's all you could do. I could not let grandmother down.
That's a great story. We're going to come back to your going to Virginia Tech, but Maria, I want to talk to you about, well, number one, did you always know, or were you surprised to find that you have a career in performing arts?
Oh my God, so surprised. And what I just so appreciate about the framing of this podcast, Sharon, is just the idea of art and activism and how do we actually express ourselves and represent ourselves on stage, and how much the performing arts in particular helps frame our conception of other people and our conception of humanity. So I'm really, really excited to be here and have that conversation. My parents, just to speak on Nikki's tip for a minute, like my parents are immigrants. My dad's from Spain, my mom's from the Dominican Republic. So I like to call myself Spininican. I am a person who is, first generation in this country. And I sometimes feel like I'm living a parallel life. Like there is a life that I could be living where I basically I'm financial security is the most important thing. And I am working in a bank and I'm having kids and I'm still in Jamaica, Queens. And the fact that I get to actually pursue this dream of mine to be able to make theater, sometimes I still pinch myself, and to be able to do it in a place like Washington, D.C., it's a dream come true. I'm not a person who thought that I was going to be making plays since I was 3 years old. My parents, are working class. My dad is a mechanic for the buses, the New York City buses, and my mom was a kindergarten school teacher. And they, for me and my sister, it was really about education and making sure that we, did our homework. And I was a big reader. So similar to Nikki on the daydreaming, my imagination, was always running away from me. And seeing people act out on stage, actually, finally getting to go to see a show and seeing sort of books live is basically what it felt like they were coming alive off of the pages onto the stage. I thought, oh my gosh, this I could do, this could be something that is for me. But again, like I don't, I feel like sometimes the theater gets the stigma that it's for folks as a luxury, right? And that people who are really privileged go into the theater because, they can afford to go into the theater. And for me, that was just not the case. So for me, I was just like, I have to prove to my parents that I can actually make a living in the theater. And because my dad wanted me to actually take the firefighter test in New York, he said, you have a good pension, you could get a salary, don't you want to be a New York City firefighter? And I was like, no, Dad, I want to make theater. So I feel really grateful and honored and lucky to be at a place like Woolly Mammoth and to actually be able to. Now they're in a place where they're like, okay, you showed us you can make a living in the theater. We're going to stop hounding you about it.
And being an activist, I mean, if you come from a family that wants you to have a reliable kind of predictable source of income and future. How did you become an activist?
I love that question because it is because of my family. It is the fact that like being American born, I actually already had this sense of entitlement of I was supposed to, these are the rights that I'm granted being in this country. And when I saw the discrimination that, for example, my mother had to deal with or my father had to deal with because of their heavy accents or whatever it was, going to the supermarket or whatever it is, I looked at that and I thought to myself, this is not okay. And this is just, I felt angry about it. I felt frustrated about it. And it felt to me like, my parents talk about this country in a way that it's like they came here fleeing dictatorships from Franco in Spain and from Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. So they came here for opportunity. And when I looked around and I saw that they weren't being treated the way that I was treated, I felt real rage around that. And it made me say like, okay, so I actually have to use my platform, to center folks who are underrepresented, who are not actually being centered, who need to be centered in our world.
Okay. How about you, Nikki? I want to ask you, you're definitely a activist, out-of-the-box thinker. What brought you to Virginia Tech? I don't think of Virginia Tech in that genre, but obviously you've been there for a while and they clearly love you. So I obviously just don't fully appreciate that they are more open to that.
It's interesting, but I was recruited to Virginia Tech, and I thought it was time to move on. My father had a stroke, and my mother called me. I was living in New York, and my mother called me, and I knew that Mommy called me not because I could do anything for Gus, who was my father, but because she needed a daughter. And I'm a big fan of daughters. I think daughters. I have a son, and I love him very much, but daughters are really precious. So when I heard Mommy's voice, I knew I needed to go home. So I packed up Tommy and my dog in my little Volkswagen and went home. And I lived with Mommy. I stayed there. Gus died finally, and we buried. Not, excuse me for like, but
I know you didn't mean it there.
Yeah.
Then Mommy and I are living together, and we lived together for almost 20 years. And Virginia Fowler recruited me to Virginia Tech. And when I had met her, and then I saw the letter, and I thought, I went upstairs and I said to her, because I wrote a poem that said I married my mother, which is pretty much where we were. And I said to Mommy, we have an invitation to a place called Virginia Tech. What's your thought? Would you like to go? And she said, I'll go with you. Wherever you want to go, I'll go. And so we sold the house in Cincinnati and we moved to Virginia. I do know this, Sharon, if we want integration, then somebody has to integrate. It's just that simple. Right. So I didn't feel like I was, making a sacrifice, but we can't say we want to get rid of segregation unless somebody is willing to not segregate. So I came to Virginia Tech. It's a mutual love. I have been very fond of Virginia Tech. I am very comfortable here in Virginia. Virginia is, of course, the state that gives us Wade versus Roe. That gives us Loving versus Virginia.
Right.
And Loving versus Virginia is probably one of the most important things because Mr. Loving realized he wanted to marry Mrs. Loving. He wanted to marry her. And nobody minded him having sex with her. Nobody minded the children who are going to come out. You can look all around. You can look at me and you and know that there's sex happening between the races.
Right.
But they did not want a marriage. They did not want to have to respect those races. We know that Thomas Jefferson, who was a Virginian, he not only didn't want to marry, he and Sally Hemings had a bunch of children, but he couldn't marry them. And so living in the state, I've been wanting our license plate to read, Loving versus Virginia. I think it should. Why not?
Yes.
I'm here in a state that also we're called the peanut state, but Virginia doesn't have anything about peanuts. And George Washington Carver had the peanuts, and we know that some black child enslaved bought those peanuts over. But you can't want everything unless you're willing to give something up. And my son went to an integrated school. And I think that he probably had as much trouble, Maria, as your children do, that people talk about him. And I reminded him, Thomas, there are people who died. And it wasn't for you to go to school. It was to break this down. And you're doing your part. Martin Luther King had his head blown off, but you are doing your part. Don't ever think that any of it is easy, right? Because there's nothing in life that's easy. And I'm very proud of you that you go to school every day and you don't let those crackers get on your nerves. And I think it's going to help them to understand, I shouldn't let those crackers get on my nerves. Because we're all doing our fair share to make a better world.
Make it a better world.
Yes.
And Maria, you came to Woolly Mammoth. Now, coming from New York City, was born in DC and lived here most of my life, but I did spend 3 years in New York, and I know the difference. And New York is definitely a much edgier space than Washington, D.C. And then you were at the Public Theater of NYC, the home of, Hamilton, my goodness, and now to Woolly Mammoth, which has a commitment to being edgy. But it had to be a real culture shock to come from New York to Washington. Is that fair?
I mean, the thing that's interesting to me is that I feel like maybe I'm talking out of turn here, but I'm just gonna say it. It seems to me like Washington of now is very different from Washington as it was, and that there are a lot of people here who still think of Washington as it was. And so me coming here, I actually found it to be really cosmopolitan. I don't drive. I literally still don't drive. I'm a New Yorker. I don't drive. I live in a place in Washington, D.C. I don't have to drive. I walk everywhere. It is not a problem. I have a great time. And so the fact that there is, it's like so much food, like the rent is booming. There's such a foodie town. There's so much to do. There's so many theaters in this area. I have not, I have in the past sort of felt like I would live nowhere else but New York. And what I have found that has been so eye-opening to me is that you do feel like you're at the center of it here in a way that I didn't feel like I was at the center of it in New York, particularly in this moment in our country where I can literally walk 10 minutes and be at Black Lives Matter Plaza and stand in solidarity with, my Black brothers and sisters. It's like I just basically feel like it means something to show up here in a different way. And that feels exciting. I definitely, I wish there was takeout late at night. I wish that things didn't close so early. I wish that there are certain things that I even miss a little. Like I like that the metro's cleaner, for sure. But there's something about it that I've really taken to, and I like that I have more space in my apartment.
Well, we've matured. There's no question. I'm in my 76, so I've lived here when we were truly a sleepy southern town, and we have matured without a doubt. Well, for a long time, we had blue laws, so you couldn't drink after a certain hour, so that's one other reason.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, you just really, so you had nothing going on in the evening. And I think Stephen Carter in The Emperor of Ocean Park speaks of how in Washington, if you wanted a restaurant, it had to be seafood or steakhouse. We've grown since then. No, we've really matured since then. So we're delighted that Woolly Mammoth managed
and
to
you've had a hand in that.
Yes.
You've had a hand in that too, a major, major hand in that. And it feels like it's just continuing to grow. So the fact that I was like, the only other place that I would want to go besides New York is Washington, D.C. says a lot.
No, we're flattered. So in the world of performing arts, the world of theater, the world of poetry, how do we begin to turn established assumptions on their head? Now, I know that's almost the mission of Woolly Mammoth, and I think I guess it's also the Public Theater of New York City, because you did host Hamilton, which at the time seemed a leap, but obviously wasn't so much of it. Well, it was a leap. It's been transformative. And then Nikki, with you started moving there, I guess, with in your thinking with your first major published work, Black Feeling, Black Talk. Did you were driven to that, I assume, because of all the turbulence of the 60s, and you wanted to find a platform to express your thoughts, your reflections around it. Is that correct?
Well, I'm a Fisk University graduate, and I'm pretty much incapable of holding a job. And so when I graduated, the next thing is, what are you going to do? And I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship through the good offices of Louise Shoemaker to come to University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Shoemaker, who has passed now, recognized, as did other people, and she took me out to lunch and she said, Miss Giovanni, we recognize you'll never be a social worker. And I had recognized that also. She said, but Columbia University is starting a program. And if you don't mind, I have enrolled you in it. And it's a longer story, which I won't carry you through, but that's how I got to New York, was through Columbia. I want to say this also. I'm one of the people, and I'm not alone, who believes that Washington, D.C. should be a state. I would like very much.
Amen.
I do. I think it's important. And I think the only reason nobody wants it to be a state is that we'd have 2 Black senators and other officers. I think that it's important that we move ahead. And so I guess I do think outside the box. I've never lived in D.C. I visit D.C. And I'm sorry that I couldn't come to see Black Lives Matter when it was on the sidewalk going up to the White House. I think it should come back. I wish there was some way that we could get it back just so I could see it. DC is
the painting is still there. You can see it. You can see it.
Oh
no, the painting is still there. I just saw it yesterday. I mean, yeah, the painting is still there, but it's a different kind of, the plaza is sort of cut off a little bit from traffic, but they're not the same, like, merchants, and not as many people are showing up. But you can definitely go.
Oh, I'm definitely, then, as soon as the COVID ends up doing whatever it's going to do, I'll come over. I just think that I think that we have to keep pushing ahead, and we have to remember that Washington, D.C., as you know, Sharon, definitely was built by Black people, was built by the enslaved. And it was the White House was the architecture was designed by Black people. So I think that D.C. owes itself. It's the father. Black people are the father of D.C. And I think that D.C. needs to continue fighting. I'd also like to see Chicago be, by the way, a city, because there's just no white people living in Chicago any damn way. And I would very much like to see that become a city. It's just time that we change the United States, because we're lagging behind. And the cowards in the White House has to be, of course, removed. We know that. And it's just time that we called him what he is. And what is the song? Let's call the song exactly what it is. Trump is a coward. And I think that it's time we call that. And I think that Trump is treasonous. And I'd like to know where his money comes from, too. So there's some questions.
No, I'm not going to go ahead, Nikki. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying a few more Black senators would help a lot.
Right. So, well, I would at least have, there would probably for certain be 2 Democrats, and at least one of them probably would be Black. Well, the thing of it that what was great about the musical Hamilton that I loved was the song "The Room Where It Happened," because to Lin-Manuel Miranda's credit, they basically reaffirmed the reality that Madison and Jefferson cut the deal with Hamilton that he could get the southern states on board with having the new nation assume the debt of the Revolutionary War, the lion's share of which was assumed by New York and some of the northern states, and they needed the help. In exchange, had to have the capital in a slave trading community. And that's why when there were 30 plus cities available And the obvious choices would have been Philadelphia, but it was much, it was very much an abolitionist spirit in Pennsylvania then, a lot of the Quakers, and then even New York City, the commercial center. No, they chose what was nothing along the banks of the Potomac, because it would be thumbs up to the institution of slavery. And so our country began with its contradiction and its evidence, in this capital of over 700,000 people. And so, yes, and then you have someone like Senator Tom Cotton, who recently said that the district should never be a state, because even though there are more people in the district than they are in Wyoming, Wyoming, he said, looks more like a state. Because can you believe he said that? It looks more like a state.
No.
They have people that are, farmers and, blue collar workers, but it looks more like a state. And of course, we know just what he meant.
Yes.
So, Maria, I mean, how do you think, you come from New York, how do you think people see the District of Columbia? I mean, one thing Ted Kennedy said to me is that one reason you don't have one at that time or struggling for home rule and statehood, he said his brother used to say, it's the best kept secret in the world. People have no idea that there are 700,000 taxpayers, or 700,000 people who, most of taxpayers, who have no real representation in the country. But how do you think most people see us?
Yeah, it's such I want to speak to Hamilton for a second too, because I just think that the musical is revolutionary for sure, literally and figuratively. And also Lin-Manuel he's just always so far ahead of his time. And I think that the thing that he did was also reframe the conversation around, seeing Black and brown bodies as the founding fathers, and sort of seeing that actually there is an encapsulation of the fact that like those that these stories actually live here and cannot be quote unquote whitewashed. So the thing that I think about is a lot is, I do think of DC as kind of a secret in here. Nobody who I talk to when I say there are 700,000 residents ever thought that was the case, and didn't know that it was still sort of taxation without representation situation. I mean, I've been it is sad to me that by becoming a DC resident, I have basically lost my representation in Congress.
Yeah.
That feels like not a good thing. And I wish that wasn't the case. I do think that there is a reframing of the narrative of DC that needs to happen. And part of it is this thing that I was pointing to before, is that I also feel like the people here got to get hip to the fact that DC is, actually wanting to broadcast to the world everything that is happening and going on here. It does feel like it feels still somewhat precarious or something like that, where people think that like it could go away. And maybe that's because it's not a state. And so it doesn't have all of those systems. It just feels like, like the things that happened with Mayor Bowser and her putting Black Lives Matter in front of the White House. I mean, that was literally her saying like, this is our city. This is our city.
Right.
You cannot ignore this.
No, I applaud
you
her
cannot
for
ignore.
It. Absolutely, yeah. But we had for years. Well, we had. So when I grew up here, you had the only real opportunity, especially for blacks, was to work in the government, and so within the government there was this Hatch Act, which meant that you just couldn't get involved actively in any kind of politics. And that was just ingrained into the psyche of people in Washington, D.C. And they just couldn't imagine you're doing anything other than keeping your good government job. I can remember when I came home and told my grandmother, who I absolutely adored, I lost my mother when she was very young, But I came home and told my grandmother, I said, oh, and I called her mom. I said, I just been made a vice president, at Pepco. I'll be the first woman to be a vice president of Pepco. And she said, well, that's good. She said, but what is your GS rating? And I mean, she could not grasp it unless I could translate that into a GS rating. And so that mindset, so as a consequence, when we first got home rule, most of the people who really seized the moment and took leadership positions were not people who had grown up here. They very often were people who had been activists, like Marion, Frank Smith, Dave Clark and others, a lot of them with SNCC, who those were the ones who seized the moment. And people who grew up here, now, my former husband and I always cared about it, always were pushing for home rule and then statehood, but it was very rare. And so, yes, people still, and when I was in office and pushed for statehood, I said, my God, I can toss the Molotov, I can lead the effort, but do I have to toss the Molotov cocktail also? And, do I have to do everything? And because there just wasn't that collective energy and you have to become indignant. You have to say, no, I'm not taking this anymore. Like a network, I'm not taking it anymore. But I don't know that fully exists, but I'm talking too much. You're the ones who should be talking.
But I agree with you. I agree with you about that indignation. I agree with you about, this is why I care about making art that is, confronts and challenges our expectations, right? And actually sort of is exhilarating in that, because, part of this is about sort of imagining worlds that haven't been imagined, right? The fact is that your grandmother couldn't imagine a world, just like we couldn't not that long ago imagine a Black superhero, right? And why was that the case? Why was that the case? And so when you're talking about popular culture, when you're talking about the representations and stuff, the stereotypes that you see ultimately that happen on TV and film, et cetera, are incredibly damaging. And so to me, part of my job, is actually to expand the idea, expand the definition of what it means to be human and show that on stage so people can see that complexity, that uniqueness, and imagine a world, dream forward into a new world where there is actually equity and justice and liberation of all people.
Well, do both of you see that with the new generations? You, Nikki, with students, do they have that sort of spirit of wanting to challenge the status quo? Because it's playing itself out on the national stage with the 2020 election to a great extent. There, you have a 40% that solidly kind of endorses preserving the status quo, and then you have arguably 60% who represent sort of a new way of thinking that doesn't make, do you see that kind of tension and eagerness among your students?
What I see in what you're calling the next generation, Sharon, I see writers like Kwame Alexander who are telling their story. I see wonderful, wonderful young women like Renee Watson, who is telling her story. And Renee Watson is a big girl, and she's writing about being a big girl. She's not writing about voting or anything like that. She's just writing about, this is who you are, this is who I am, and this is the story that I'm going to tell. And I think that that's very important. I think probably one of the most incredibly brilliant young writers in America, if not the world right now, is Edwidge Dadicat, who is Haitian. And I think that the United States, and I'll be glad when the Haitians finally decide, we owe the Haitians something. They were the first republic in the New World. And I know we're talking to someone saying a Dominican, but I know that we need to do a little better about the Haitians, because it's time that we quit beating up on them because we're jealous. So I think that you're asking, do I see that the kids are writing one kind of story? What I want to see them write is their own story. They don't have to count on people like me, one of the most brilliant writers whom we just lost, Toni Morrison. They don't have to count on Toni. What they have to do is tell their story in their way. And that's what I want to see and hear, because there's some wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stories out there that have to be told.
Yeah. How about you, Maria? Do you see that with playwrights and performers coming to pitch their activities at the Woolly Mammoth?
I do, but the thing that I feel like is happening in the theater is a little bit, it's matching what's happening in the country, really. And I say this with a lot of respect to my colleagues. It's not like those writers didn't exist and those people didn't exist, right? So the fact is that gatekeepers, and major theaters are now getting hip to the fact that there is insanely amazing talent in the Black and Indigenous and people of color pool, and they are now are rushing to make sure that they are representative of everybody who's coming up in all those different stories that you're talking about, Nikki. So to me, part of the thing that's happening is that the opportunities are changing, but the cynical view is it's changing because white folks are waking up to some stuff. And that happens, on like clockwork. It always happens like a certain number of years in. And the question is whether or not this Generation Z will actually be able to sustain that momentum. And they are the young people I talk to know how to talk about anti-racism in a way that I didn't know. I certainly didn't know how to talk about it when I was younger. They know how to talk about their identity. They know how to talk about consent culture. They know how to talk about actually being able to, they know what they want in a different kind of way. And that feels really, really exciting to me. Look at the march, all those kids at Parkland who did that march, who Emma Gonzalez and those folks, they're theater kids. They make theater together. That's how they know how to collectively organize and put things together. The best organizers are theater people. We put on shows. They're young people who are, yeah.
No, it's impressive. This younger generation is impressive.
I think,
so I have a lot of faith. I have a lot of faith in them. I do.
I think it's very interesting. In my new book, which is called Make Me Rain, I tried to write, by the way, Maria, I tried to write an opera because I wrote this book during the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson. So I tried to write an opera about the murder of Michael Ferguson. And I've had more fun with it because my musical sense, I cannot sing, as you probably have heard. And so I've got the soprano coming in, you have murdered my son. And I just think, wouldn't it be wonderful if we can get a good opera on the murder of some of these Black men and women? It depends on I'm sure that there's a good opera out there on the murder of Breonna Taylor. But it's just fun to watch the young people deciding what they want to do. And I think you're right. I have no question that what's going on in Portland, Oregon, is it's opera, it's theater. And at some point, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, it will be an incredible opera because you've got the chorus there and what you're looking for, and you've got Black Lives Limited. So you have your soprano and your alto, and you're going to have, I don't know who would be your bass or your baritone, but I do know the best or the most famous American opera is Porgy and Bess. And there's no getting around that. And everybody says, oh, look at what George Gershwin did. All I know that he did was go down and steal our music. And so he did. So we know that America and opera go together. And I would love, I won't be around in 50 years when they finally do it. But I think you're right that it is theater. And they are doing an incredible job. So you in theater should be very, very proud of yourself, as we in poetry are very proud because we've given some of the words.
Right. No, you have.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
So as we sort of close out today, I'd like your thoughts about where you think we are in our country. I know that all of us care deeply about Washington, D.C. being respected as a full participating member of the political structure of our country by becoming the 51st state. And there's a good chance, I think, that if we're lucky enough to have a sweep of with the presidency and the Senate to go after that, because I think, if anything, by sort of forcing a decision, contrary to what happened to with Obama, with Merrick Garland, and then, forcing a decision with the justice, that there may be an energy to say, look, we need to have full representation, and at least the district, if not the district and Puerto Rico, should become states. But that said, how, Maria, do you see where we are in our country at this moment? I asked earlier, are we at an inflection point? And that inflection point maybe was a preamble to it, or a precursor to what we're experiencing, was evidence, even in the musical Hamilton, that it's time to see America in a different light.
Absolutely. I mean, you asked on this podcast around activism, and to me, art and activism go hand in hand. And the thing that I think about is, in this moment, we are learning a new vocabulary. We are all learning a new vocabulary, actually, and it is one that is, it saddens me that it's been coming at the expense of people of color, particularly Black people, dying. Like, it is not just that, it gives me deep remorse and regret that, frankly, for me, it's like, what have I been doing? I got to do more here, And so I do think that we are at an inflection point. I want it to be an inflection point, because what I see happening is there's transformation happening, and it is forced transformation, which, frankly, I don't mind as long as it's transformation. You saw that with for example, the Washington football team. That change happened, right? How long have they been fighting for that change?
A long time.
How long have they been fighting for that change? And now it finally happened. So there is something occurring that I want to harness that energy, for my theater, for our community here in DC, for the artistic landscape in our country, but really for this local community is how can we actually, allow people to be allow their full humanity? How do we do that? And I'm sort of praying that it continues, this forced transformation, because it's the right thing.
Now, well, how about you, Nikki? Do you and I lived through the '60s, and there was a lot of energy and excitement then, and we made a few steps forward. I guess some would say a lot of steps forward, but the institutional, systemic issues that have plagued our country stay with our country. Do you see something more promising with what is going on now?
I am, and I hate to say this because it sounds naive, but I'm hopeful, because I go back to, I knew and was a friend of Muhammad Ali. And I remember when Muhammad Ali said, no Vietnamese ever called me a nigger. And he refused to go to the war. And now we're watching the athletes making tremendous change. Their power, they're making tremendous changes. And I'm very proud of that. I'm liking to see. It has taken a while. I'm not saying it won't, but I like what I see about the changes. I am very proud, as are all people, of Black Lives Matter. I'm proud of what those women put together, and that the fact that they had enough sense not to put together an office and a telephone, or what is this thing we talking about, a computer, that they actually know if I did that, they'd blow up my office, or they'd blow us up. So they've done the things that they should do. I'm very proud of America making a change. They may not like it. We have gone through worse. We who are Black Americans, we have been enslaved. We have been segregated against. There's a country and Western song that says, I've been cheated, been mistreated. When will I be loved? And, it's nothing at the Everly Brothers, because you're kind of young, Marie. But
I know that song. I do.
We're just going forward. We gave, Sharon, you and I gave the youngsters a non-segregated world. We got rid of segregation. We cannot get rid of racism. somebody else is going to have to do that. The next generation. This is what the kids are struggling with now. It's not segregation, but racism. And they're going to have to deal with it and have to decide, are we cowards? Are we cowardly and racist? Or are we going to make a change? And I'm hoping for the kids, and I cheer for them. And if not, I sit and drink champagne and watch my fish pond. I've done what I can. And I know that's not cowardly, but my generation can't judge the next generation. They're doing a good job, I think. And I think that they're moving forward at their pace where they want to go as they want to go. I think they're doing a good job.
No, I do too. I can't remember the lines exactly of Khalil Gibran, but these arrows are moving forward in ways we could not imagine, and it's very hopeful. But we also know for all of us that change, is not easy on a lot of people, and it's unsettling. And without a doubt, for a country that has had a very strong point of view about who should have power, who shouldn't have power, how we dispense this, it's going to be a struggle. And so a lot of that struggle is playing itself out in the 2020 election, and it's a little closer than I think sometimes we want to believe, but I'm hopeful, and as Jesse used to say, keep hope alive. So IPPH on Air has really benefited from your insights, your conversation. You two have been terrific. I'm going to close before I thank you by reminding people that we do have a Twitter platform at Politics Policy #1, and then a Facebook and Instagram platforms at Politics Policy History. So you can make comments, follow us there, tell us what you think we ought to be doing. Try to be kind, but we welcome it. Nikki Giovanni, what a pleasure. Manuela Goyanes, what a pleasure. This has been a wonderful conversation. You both have enriched our understanding of how performing arts, popular culture can make such a big difference in our lives, especially for all of us who care deeply about DC statehood. Thank you, and wonderful to have you.